What's up, YouTube? I'm Trent Wel-Don. Welcome back to the channel Wel-Don Tanks. It is finally time. I'm holding this in my hand, I don't know why. Finally time to get some some tanks on this rack. Not the other way around. Tanks go on the rack does not go on the tanks. Anyways, we are finally getting tanks ready for water, and I want to take you through step by step of how I'm actually plumbing these tanks to receive and work in unison with the auto water change. Now that we got that completely jumbled intro out of the way, again, we're working on getting the tanks on the rack tonight, the start of them. So some of the tanks I'm actually currently using upstairs, I will need to move fish down to these tanks, then get those tanks brought down here and ready to work with the auto water change. And that's what we're focusing on tonight. I want to teach you and show you how I am plumbing each tank that will be connected to the auto water change on this racking system. There's a couple different methods you can do for this, and let's be honest, right? The process of an auto water change is water will flow into the tank, overflow to a designated point, flow out of the tank through a drain line to the drain in my utility room. But the disclaimer on this is there's no perfect way to do this, right? People are gonna say like, this is the best method or this is the safest method. Fact of the matter is, water's supposed to stay in the tanks, and there's always some risk when you are plumbing for an auto water change. So just heads up on that. But I will say though that when you have numerous amounts of tanks, I prefer an auto water change. It can make things so much easier. But it's all down to preference, and you can adapt any of this to fit your needs. Make it a semi-auto water change, make it a full auto water change, whatever fits your needs. So let's get into this, and let me teach you a few of the plumbing pieces we're going to need for this build. So we're getting a 10-gallon tank ready. I was able to drill them tonight and actually get them painted. So I chose to go black on the sides and the back of the tank, and then I also drilled a hole in the back of the tank. Now what that will allow me to do, hang on here, there we go. What that will allow me to do is install what we call a bulkhead. Now, bulkheads come in all shapes, shapes incorrect. All come in the same shape, but they come in different sizes. So here I have a 1-inch bulkhead, which will allow for 1-inch PVC pipe to meet up with it. But on these tanks, we're going to be using a 1/2-inch bulkhead. What that allows is 1/2-inch PVC pipe to be connected to the bulkhead. So what is a bulkhead, right? This is a very important thing to understand when using these. I used a diamond-coated drill bit. You can purchase them on Amazon. I buy mine from Bulkhead Supply, and you will need to find a correct sizing chart. That's why I like Bulkhead Supply, is depending on the size drill bit you use, will depend on what size bulkhead you will need to then fit that hole. So what this is gonna do is this bulkhead comes basically in 3 pieces. You have the actual bulkhead itself, which will fit through that hole. You have the O-ring, which is going to create a seal through the tank, and then you have the locking nut. And that's going to twist onto the bulkhead, therefore creating the seal between the tank and the outside of the tank. So what this is, it's just a simple plumbing piece that allows you to access through the tank. It's very similar to the overflow I'm using on the 220 gallon. I'm actually using 1-inch bulkheads to get water down to the sump. In this case, it's just the method and the way we're going to allow water to overflow from the tank. You can build these with PVC pipe I've seen done. I've seen people use an internal overflow box. There's some inherent risk with both of those methods, more so in my opinion, is because you have to keep them on a complete siphon at all times. If you lose that siphon, you're gonna overflow your tank when you're pumping water into this thing. With the bulkhead method, you do not need a siphon because it's literally just going to allow water to overflow when it reaches that point. But if you do not have a proper seal with that gasket, you're gonna overflow your tank, or you're gonna get leakage actually. So now that we've got that done, you can get these in different varieties of, you can buy them to where the head side and the flange side are both slit fit, or you can get them where they're both threaded. You can get where it's slit versus threaded. So all different combinations. I personally am using 1/2-inch slip on the head side, thread on the flange side. And the reason is, my last fish room, when I changed things around, I was using slip fit on everything, and I ended up not being able to reuse a lot of the bulkheads. So that's my goal here. But then the reason I'm using a slip on the head side is actually going to allow me to use PVC pipe inside the tank to set the water level. So what we're gonna do, head side goes in the tank. So the gasket is actually going inside the tank. The gasket does not go on the outside of the tank. So right there, it just slips through. And when you use the proper hole saw to drill your hole, it's gonna fit perfectly. Then you're gonna use your nut on the outside of the tank. Now it's very important that when you're tightening this down, do not over tighten this. They sell a bulkhead wrench. You can use pliers for this, but the issue people run into is if you actually over tighten these bulkheads, you can crack the glass. Now these are just $1 per gallon sell 10-gallon tanks. So the glass isn't super thick, and I've seen people when they're tightening this down, you will crack the glass. So a hand tight fit, snug it down. I've never had an issue with this. The only time I've ever had a bulkhead leak was when I actually had like dirt that was built up on the tank and I did not wash it off. So again, if you felt more comfortable with it, this is right on the paint. I don't have any issue with it. If you feel more comfortable, you could actually scrape the paint off around this, tape off, whatever you're more comfortable with. So that's the bulkhead installed on the back of the tank. Then I'm gonna just use some simple connecting, threaded by slip fitting that's gonna connect there. Bit of a PVC pipe, which I will need to cut down to match up into the drain line. And then just a 90 with a thread to allow it. So it's gonna look something like this. I don't know if that's even shown on camera. Something like to this effect, which is gonna allow me to just bring water to the drain line. But now I really wanna show you, this is a trick that I learned from the Aquarius podcast. Randy Reed, he works with Aquarium Co-op. He runs his own channel, the Aquarius podcast, does some incredible interviews. Thankfully, and I'm so happy he did this, he put out a video of him building his own rack, or putting together the rack in his fish room, but took us through the entire process, setting the rack up, getting the air lines run, getting the drain lines run, plumbing the tank for the overflow. And this is a trick I learned from Randy. So I've always used barbed fittings, barbed adapters with some flexible tubing to actually run from the end of the bulkhead to the drain line. That way there's some movement in it, you have some flexibility, like literally flexibility in that tubing to match up to the drain ports. So here's the trick I learned from him. I used to buy like, threaded, not threaded. There's a vinyl tubing that has kind of like a thread base inside of it. I bought just regular vinyl tubing that kind of isn't the most pliable, so I've always had trouble with the tubing I bought. Randy actually talked about using the Python water change system tubing. So what I did is I just bought a 10-foot extension off Amazon. Links will be down in the description below. It was like $10 for 10 feet, maybe $10 for 20 feet, something like that. And then I just cut it down to what size I need. And this is the most pliable, flexible, strength tubing I've ever used. If you think about it, when we use these for water changes, I'm running upwards of like 80-degree water through this tube on some of my tanks. Never had an issue with it. So that is definitely a huge tip I cannot thank Randy enough for. But then the one that's actually saved me money was using a certain barbed adapter. It's a thread to a barb. I used to buy these so I bought this from Home Depot, but I used to buy the ones from Home Depot that were like in the actual like plumbing aisle that were clear. They're like $3-4 a piece. Then when you need 15 of them, that adds up quite a bit. Randy talked about using these blue ones, and I will leave some I'll try to leave some links down in the description below for some thread adapters for the others and you don't have access to a hardware store, want to purchase online, other countries. But if you can, if you're in the States, Home Depot, go one aisle over from the PVC plumbing. It's more in it's in the sprinkler section where it's actually going to be like their drip systems. These were like $2 for a pack of 5. And I think you can even get them a larger pack of that way too. So it's a 1/2-inch thread, which is going to match up to that 90 thread that we had on the end of the PVC pipe. And then this is a 1/2-inch barbed adapter. And the sizing of this Python tube, when it matches over this, is a really tight fit, which I personally am not going to be using hose clamps because of how snug a fit it actually is. I feel very safe with it. And I can actually get this tubing up all the way over all the barbs. So that's a lot to actually take off. If you feel more comfortable with it for the peace of mind, buy some cheap stainless steel hose clamps, you're good to go, but you actually will not need them with this. But again, you can choose to. Now, if you've ever tried to fit tubing over a barbed adapter, it is one of the hardest things to actually do. I mean, I barely got it started. Very difficult. The trick to this, and everybody has access to this, or should, get some hot water. Hot water, boiling water, put it in a mug if you were right next to it. Take these up to your sink. Dip maybe the first inch and a half of this tubing in that hot water and let it sit there for a minute. Run it under hot water for a minute. Then you will actually be able to slide this right over all of these barbs with ease. Then when it cools down, it's really gonna have a really snug fit on these barbed adapters. So then from there, once all that's said and done, everything's connected, I'm just gonna connect all of this up to the back of this bulkhead, run it, flip the tank around, slide it into place, and I will connect this tube into one of the drain ports on the drain line. And it's that simple. But I have one more tip for you before we go with this video, and that is, let me find my tools here. Where did I put them? Ah, there they are. So once you get everything set up, you're actually ready to run the flexible tubing to your drain line, you need to be careful with this. If this sits down in that drain line and actually sits flush with it, it'll actually suction itself to that drain line and will not drain. So on the end of the tubing that you're gonna run to the drain line, and you can kind of get a feel for it because there's these natural curves in these tubing. That's what I like to do. I like to use the natural curve in my favor. On the end you're running to the drain line, like I said, take a simple pair of snips, wire cutters, whatever you have. All we're gonna do is make a notch, make a triangle notch in the end of this tube. So cut that right out. I don't know if that's on camera or not. So there's, again, I just made a little notch in it. What that will allow to happen, there is no possible way the end of this tube will be able to suction itself to the bottom of that drain line. Because of that notch, this will never siphon itself. So you will always, you could sit this literally on the bottom, but because of that notch, you will always have water that will be able to go through this. So, and then people are gonna ask, I'm using 1/2-inch bulkheads on all my tanks right now because it's not gonna be a fast water change, right? This is gonna be a simple overflow process of a water change. So nothing incredibly fast. That's why I felt comfortable using 1/2-inch bulkheads. In my last fish room, I used 1-inch bulkheads on everything. So again, that's that larger size bulkhead. Got a lot of tips from a lot of people that it allows for things like duckweed to overflow, without clogging anything. But I'm going to be using a small pre-filter sponge that I purchased from Aquarium Co-op inside all of these tanks because these are going to be breeding tanks. Specifically for all right, man, I should just end the video here. Specifically for Japanese rice fish. There we go, finally got it out. The fry on those are so small that I was really worried they would get sucked over into the overflow. I've actually had fish go down my overflow, so that's why I'm using 1/2-inch bulkheads. And then on the inside of it, on that bulkhead, what I'll be able to do is I'm gonna put a street fit 90 to the bulkhead, and I'll run a standpipe of 1/2-inch pipe, which I'll slip the sponge right over that, creating a nice pre-filter so nothing can actually clog the tube anyways. All right, guys, there it is. I think we're pushing like 15 minutes at this point. Long-winded explanation, but I really wanted to kind of give you a visual of how I'm setting up the tanks to the auto water change. And this is my method for it. And again, I'm so glad that Randy put that video out because this changed the entire way I'm doing my overflow system on my tanks. And it is by far the best method that I have personally used. So, hope this helped. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below. You can send me direct messages on Instagram. I typically reply as fast as I can. But again, leave me a comment. I'm always curious. I say this is how I learn. Have you done an overflow system? If you have, what's your method? If you haven't, are you willing to try one? Are you going to try one? So anyways, thank you again for joining me on the adventures of this fish room build. We are cranking stuff out now. Videos are going to be coming, so make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you do not miss what we've got coming, because I promise you we got some sweet things coming to this fish room. So again, I'm Trent Wel-Don. Thank you for joining me. We'll see you on the next one.